Recording. So let's open this up. So my name is Dr. Venus Evans Winters, also known as Dr. V. I am the founder of Planet Venus and Planet Venus Institute. And today I have Mr. Anthony Browder with us here on Planet Venus. And we're going to talk about all things ABEN, or in particular, a soul-centered approach to educating teachers. So a book that ABEN and Doctors Rona Frederick and Komet Shockley recently put out. We've done other episodes on this book. And the book basically just honors the work of ABEN, a Black education network. And Janice and I have been working with the band now for over 4 years. I've served on the board, I've volunteered with the band, I've been the speaker, and now I'm behind the scenes working on everything from social media management to like public advocacy. So today we'll be talking with Anthony Browder, and I'll allow you to introduce yourself, Mr. Browder, only because people call you Brother Browder, Anthony Browder, Tony Browder, Tony. So I've heard it all. So I'll let you introduce yourself and talk about a little bit about who you are and your relationship to the book.
Sure. Well, I prefer to be called Tony. I am a product of the West Side of Chicago. I have lived most of my life, however, in Washington, D.C. I came here in 1971 to attend Howard University and was exposed here in the DC area to a wealth of people, a wealth of knowledge that has transformed my consciousness and positioned me to do the work that I've been doing for the last 47 years. And that work is about rescuing and reconstructing our historical and cultural memory. I know very clearly from my experiences as a child growing up in the 1960s, that we have been fighting to tell our story. We have been fighting to undo the erasure of African people from the respectable commentary of world history, not just African history, but world history. And I've been blessed to have been able to walk with some of the giants who have been in the forefront of the restoration of African historical and cultural memory. And I'm now allowing their spirit to move through me to continue their work to reawaken the sleeping giants of America and the world. And that's what I've dedicated the last 47 years of my life to doing. I believe in the practical application of historical and cultural information. I don't believe in sitting on your high horse talking about who we are and what we've done. If you can't apply historical knowledge into your current life in order to favorably influence your future activities, then it's a waste. So I've lived my life incorporating this knowledge and incorporating these principles that I've learned into my personal life. And I think as we get into this interview today, the things that I have done will serve as a testimonial to who we are as a people and what we have the capacity to do. And my work with the ABEN has been working with children initially, high school children initially in Northern California. And it has expanded to working with youth nationwide. And it's part of my goal and desire to rescue the minds of our people wherever we may be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I hear some John Henry Clark in there.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And so that's and I love when you say rescue the minds of our children, no matter where they're at. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So can you tell me, speaking of where we're at now and where we were, in the spirit of Sankofa, I am curious as a cultural product of Chicago, the South Side of Chicago proper. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe how did your growing up in Chicago shape who you are today and your approaches to education?
Okay, let me make sure I understand your statement correctly. You're from the South Side of Chicago?
Yes.
Okay, very good, very good. Well, I lived my last 2 years in Chicago. I lived on the South Side, in the South Shore, before I moved out here. But I grew up, I was born in 1951. So I grew up in segregated America. We lived on the West Side in a predominantly all Black community. My elementary school was a block from my house. I had teachers who looked like me. I had teachers who had a vested interest in making sure that I learned how to read, how to write, and how to reason. I still recall several of my teachers just loving on me because I was bright, and they encouraged me to do well in school. And that encouragement has stuck with me for the rest of my life. I grew up with Black dentists, Black doctors, Black dermatologists. I saw Black excellence all around me in segregated Chicago. And so I never had feelings of inferiority, but I was about 10 years old when I became aware of the presence of racism. I recall when Martin Luther King tried to integrate the South Side of Chicago in Market Park. That was around 66 or 67. And I remember him being hit in the head with a brick by white protesters who were upset with him trying to integrate Marquette Park. And I remember Dr. King saying that he's faced all kinds of racial hatred in the South, but he's never experienced the hatred that he experienced in Chicago. And it's important to note that Chicago was, in the 50s and 60s, and still is today, the most segregated city in the United States of America. So I was 13 years old when Malcolm X was assassinated. I was 17 when Dr. King was assassinated. I was 18 when Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were assassinated. Their headquarters was on the west side of Chicago, not far from where I lived. So I was fortunate to grow up in the 1960s. So I saw how when Black people began to assume control over their history and their culture, began to see Africa in a favorable light, began to take on African names, began to wear their hair naturally. And as we gravitated towards Africa and embraced Africa, it sent shockwaves throughout America. We were imbued with a sense of power and self-awareness that frightened this nation, and they had to shift our attention. I saw how our embracing our history and culture spread around the world, how it influenced Steve Biko and Africans in Brazil and other parts of the continent. So I'm well aware of the power of African consciousness. I'm well aware of the need of the creators of the United States of America to suppress that power in order for them to maintain power. And the key to our ability to thrive as a people is linked to our ability to know who we are. Our story did not begin with enslavement. Our story is the first story of human beings on the planet. Our story is the first story of human beings who populated the planet. The accomplishments of African people is the greatest story never told. And through my experiences with the ABEN for practically a decade, I would come out once a month to speak at 3 different high schools. I would pull students out of their classes, and we would discuss my first book from the Browder file. We would discuss the essays. They would write reflection papers. And I saw how exposure to their history and culture transformed the consciousness of these children. And it reinforced what I knew and what has become my greater mission, and that is to get this information to as many of our people as possible, young and old, so that we can understand who we are, live up to our potential as a people, and then be intentional about shaping the world that we want our children's children to inherit. And that's my mission, and that's something that I will devote the rest of my life to fulfilling.
Oh, thank you for that. So the Browder Files, I think everybody should get that book. So after I first read that book, I actually decided to start a Saturday school program for African children using that book. And so I built my own team of educators. They may not be your formally educated, certified, licensed teachers. Some of them were, but we definitely used that book to bring awareness to the African tradition and African history here in Illinois. So thank you for that book, and I just had to
Mhm.
shout that out.
So wait a
Um,
minute, you said here in Illinois. So are you in Chicago now?
yeah, I'm outside of Chicago right now. Yeah.
All right, now I don't know why, but I always associated you with California. Every time I saw you, it was in California.
Yeah,
So I have to
yeah, that
realign
tells
my
you a lot
thinking.
about a band and Miss Deborah's work. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely.
And so now I did have a question. So you kind of were beginning to connect your experience of being I should say how ABEN found you, but my question was, did you find ABEN, or did ABEN find you? So what
Uh,
is the connection there?
Ben found me. I was at a speaking engagement in Chicago, and let's see, Deborah and Joyce King and another person were doing an educational summit um, in Chicago, and I was brought out to introduce Dr. Wilson. Dr. Wilson was
Oh,
being honored. And so I came out and I arrived early at the hotel and my room wasn't ready. So I was told that I could go to Debra Watkins' room, and she was there with her daughter. And her daughter was, Tony Browder's coming here. So her daughter was familiar with from the Browder file. Deborah wasn't. And so once Deborah became aware of me and who I was and what I've done, we developed a working relationship that has blossomed into a very productive relationship that has benefited thousands of people around the world.
Yeah, and so that's when I would have officially met you in present. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so Dr. Francis Cress Wesling was at that gathering, and I think at the time we weren't calling it a conference. We weren't calling it a summit. What were we calling it? We were calling it something. But anyway, you were
Mhm.
there with Dr. Francis Cress Wesling, and Dr. Naeem Akbar was there. Chika was it Chica Cool?
Chica.
Chica Cool was
Mhm.
was there. Yeah,
Mhm.
so all the big name folks was in one room. It was amazing. And again, my hometown of Chicago. And I also remember on this slide, which I can't get out of my mind, you were doing like you were showing some early work, right? That was in
Mhm.
the age of like the traditional PowerPoints. You were showing some early work of you and Atlantis, your daughter.
Mhm. Mhm.
And for some of us, Atlantis has not aged, right? I think she was maybe 9 in that photo, and she has not aged at all. But we know now she's a mother, doing all things education still to this day. So Atlantis is famous in her own right.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so in the book, A Soul-Centered Approach to Educating Teachers, you write about education in early African societies. And you talked about educational norms, and you talked about the importance of group identity alongside those group norms.
Mhm.
And as someone who spends a lot of time in doing educational research, working with pre-service and veteran teachers, consulting with school districts and school administrators, and I work, Tony, in the field of mental health.
Mm.
So some of these conversations around mental side or psychological dis-ease, I think there's an association between
Absolutely.
individual and group identity and these norms that are being lost or erased. Can you explain when you use the words that culture was the glue that kept societies together?
Sure.
Culture was the glue. Can you explain that statement?
Well, culture for every people, culture is your base. You're born into a family, and your family has traditions within your household and within the community of households. So your language, your food, your socialization process, the way you worship the unseen, the creator, all of these things help to shape your identity. And when African people were in charge of their destiny, they understood on a very basic and fundamental level that every child born in the community was a returning ancestor. And as a consequence, there were rituals in place in order to ensure that this returning ancestor would be able to continue their life's destiny. Dr. Francis Welsing gave us the statement of every person is born with a cosmic assignment. Our soul made a commitment to come back to continue specific work for the advancement of the race. So these principles and concepts were thoroughly understood and incorporated into every aspect of life in Africa. So every child is a returning ancestor. So if that child is a returning ancestor, then you know what name to give that child because you know who that ancestor is that's returning. You know what the career path of that ancestor is going to be. And so you socialize that child to understand that they have a responsibility to the continued growth and evolution of the community, not just the family, but the entire community. So these were traditions that were spread from the Nile to the Niger, and the process of enslavement was designed to disrupt that, to destroy any connection we have with our past, and to convince us that we had no past, that we were the discards of the planet. We had no value, and as a consequence, they could do anything to us that they wished. And so that was part of the brainwashing or the reprogramming. And what we're dealing with now is trying to free ourselves from mental slavery. As my dear colleague and brother A.C. Hilliard said, mental slavery is worse than physical slavery, because a mental slave believes that he or she is free, never realizing that the shackles are on their brains. So I was fortunate in my development as a young man to be in the company of historians like John Henry Clark and Dr. Ben and Elizabeth Middleton. I was fortunate to be in the company of psychologists such as A.C. Hilliard and Naeem Akbar and Wade Nobles and Edwin Nichols. I was fortunate to be in the presence of psychiatrists such as Dr. Francis Welsing, Richard King, and Patricia Newton. So my understanding of history, of African people, is a multi-layered understanding. And so if we're about helping our people, we have to understand that the problems that we've been confronted with are problems not of our own design that impact us on multiple levels simultaneously. So if we wish to be effective in transforming our consciousness, we have to understand the circumstances that put us in the current predicament that we find ourselves in. We also have to be clearly aware of who we were before we were in that predicament, and then understand what tools we have available to us today at this very moment that we can use to free our minds, free our bodies. And then once we are free, we have to have clearly defined goals as to where we wish to go, because whatever those goals are, they will determine the path of everyone who follows us. And lastly, if we connect the missing pieces of our historical and cultural memory that have been shattered and erased, then if we are a continuum of the ancestors who have preceded us, then we have the capacity, by connecting with those ancestors, by increasing what I refer to as our ancestral intelligence, right? The only AI that should matter to people of African ancestry. By tapping into our ancestors, we then become the vessels through which they can speak, think, and work through, which allows us to create the things that will benefit them in future generations. That's the process. And that is what our oppressor is working overtime to keep us disconnected from, because they understand very clearly who we are. They know far better than we do who we are and the potential that we have, that we've always had. And so the only way that they can maintain power is by creating false narratives and systems of oppression, racism, white supremacy, and all these other terms, segregation, discrimination. They understand very clearly that when the playing field is level and we have an opportunity to compete fairly, we always excel. We always rise to the top, whether it's sports, whether it's politics, whether it's entertainment. In any endeavor, there's something inherent within us that allows us to succeed. And so this is what's at stake. And once we are clear about what the stakes are, then we can choose to work with those in our community who are ready for us to work with, because it's not about imposing any ideologies on anyone. It's about freeing the minds of those who are ready to be freed. And I'll end with this quote from Sister Harriet Tubman, who was enslaved in the concentration camp less than 100 miles from where I'm sitting right now. She said that she freed thousands of slaves, but could have freed thousands more if only they had known that they were enslaved. So if during the period of man's worst inhumanity to man, there were African people who believed that they deserved to be enslaved, you can just imagine what free Black folk now are thinking. So whoever controls your education determines your thoughts, which is why we have to assume total responsibility for knowing ourselves, educating every Black life that matters to us, and spending the rest of our lives to ensure that information is passed down from mouth to ear so that we can shape the future generations that will favorably control the destiny of this planet. I mean, the life of this planet is at stake if we don't step up and do the things that we've always had the capacity to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now I heard so much, and so I'm trying to summarize. I feel like I'm listening to I'm in class. I'm in class with Tony Browder. So when you speak, I heard two things. One, you said when African people were in control of their own societies, when African people were in control of their own destinations. You also stated that there are certain tools that are useful to not just saving us, but saving humanity, the
Mhm.
planet.
Mhm.
And there was something in between that I thought was important. You said that when we're talking about the education of Black people, of African people, and how we're going to save the planet if we tap into our AI, our
Mhm.
ancestors' intelligence, our African intelligence. You said we can work with the people who choose to work with
Mhm.
us. People who are choosing to be
Mhm.
on the right side of humanity.
Mhm.
Um, and so what are some of those tools? Can you explain, like, can you be specific as when you're thinking about the norms of African society or the norms of historical and cultural memory? What are some, in the state of Black education today, what are some norms that we need and what type of culture do we
Mhm.
need to be tapping into? What are those tools you're naming?
The first tool is to know that your life has value, that you were born with a purpose, that you have a cosmic destiny, and that your life is a continuum of your prior life. You're not just here. You don't just live your life, die, and that's it. As one of the things, one of the most fundamental takeaways from the study of Kemet or ancient Egypt is the understanding that these African people did not have a preoccupation with death. They had a preoccupation with life. They understood that the soul was eternal, but the body was temporary. Hence, this very famous scene painted in tombs and on papyri, a scene called the weighing of the soul. So it speaks to the fact that you will be judged at the end of your life. You will be judged to see how well you conducted that life. And the quality of that judgment determines your next life. And so there were principles that every person was taught from childhood to abide by. And those were known as the 42 admonitions of Ma'at, the 42 declarations of innocence. I have not stolen. I have not committed murder. I have not defrauded offerings. I have not polluted myself. I have not polluted the land. 42 declarations of innocence. And so those were tools that were given to African people by African people that served as a foundation upon which you can live your life, your present life, and all future lives, because you ultimately were going to be judged on how well you adhere to these principles. So this is foundational information that has been appropriated by others, and we should know and we should be able to state very clearly that the 42 declarations of innocence have been distilled by Europeans into the 10 commandments. And we also have to understand that there's a profound difference between a declaration of innocence and a commandment. Declaration of innocence means that you've been educated in an environment where you know right from wrong. A commandment is a statement that says you don't know right from wrong, and you have to be commanded not to commit murder. You have to be commanded not to do these things because there is no socialization process in place that connects you to your humanity, your spirit. So we have to acknowledge who we were and who our oppressor is and make a conscious choice to internalize those principles and values that are still in us. We carry those principles and values in our DNA. They are part of our genetic memory. They have never been erased. What has been erased is our capacity to access those memories. And so through a process of education, through a process of socialization, you then can create the environment where your ancestors can then speak to you, and you now know the things that you've always known. So if that is the case, then is the duty of our oppressors to separate you from your ancestors, to say that that's pagan, to say that that's anti-religious. Anything that they can do to separate you from your power keeps them in their power. So in terms of tools, understanding Ma'at, understanding Nile Valley history and culture, understanding the process of the salvation of the soul, the immortality of the soul, understanding that life is cyclical, that we don't just go around once in life. Life is a continuum. And when you understand those basic principles and values, that allows you to recalibrate how you move through life today. And it imbues you with a power that allows you to challenge and confront and overcome seemingly impossible odds. You know, under normal circumstances, what was done to African people would have exterminated any other group of people. We have to recognize that we continue to exist today because of something so powerful inside of us that cannot be erased. The only thing our enemy can do is erase our connection to the memories that connect us to our power. So my work as a cultural memory specialist is to help our people remember, that is to restore the fragmented aspects of our past and our present so that we can progress from Sankofa to Kofa. We go back and reclaim the knowledge of the past, but now we know what to do with that knowledge today so that we can determine where we're going to go and where future generations will go. And we do that with the knowledge that we're also preparing for ourselves and our future returns. So it's that quantum thinking that will help to propel us to our proper place in the world, not just America, but the world. We are citizens of the world. And once we stake our claim as world citizens, we won't limit our thinking to just America or just Africa. And we can use the powers and talents and gifts that we possess to restore Ma'at, to restore the balance and harmony that's so critical if this planet is going to continue to exist. That's what's at stake, my sister.
The planet is
The
at
planet,
stake.
absolutely.
Thank you for that. So you wrote in the book, A Soul-Centered Approach to Educating Teachers. You recovered this conversation between Schomburg and Arthur Schomburg, right? Arthur Schomburg and John Henry Clark. And also, once being a part of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, I had to study intensely the work of John Henry Clark. So I am more familiar with Clark's work than I am Schomburg's. But you recall this conversation where Schomburg said to Clark, "What you're calling African history and Negro history are the missing pages of world history. Son, go and study your master. Go study the history of the people who enslaved you and find out why they found it a necessity to remove an entire people from the respectable commentary of the history of the world." Okay, so that quote stood out to me, but I wanted to ask you, how does ABEN raise the consciousness of the people? How does ABEN raise the consciousness of the people? So in context, you wrote, summarizing that statement from Schomburg to Clark, you wrote, "He taught Clark the interrelationship of African history to world history and geographical reference and its capacity to awaken the historical consciousness of a people." So how does ABEN raise the consciousness of the people?
All right, so let's begin with the title of the book that we're discussing today, A Soul-Centered Approach to Education. So when we talk about soul-centered, we're talking about tapping into ancestral awareness. We are soul people. Back in the 60s, brothers and sisters popularized the phrase, soul brother, soul sister. We ate soul food. We talk about Black power. So when we focus our attention on our soul, that aspect of our being that has been with us from the beginning of time, we ground ourselves, we anchor ourselves in a power which no one can destroy. So if we tap into that power in order to educate a targeted audience, and if we understand the concept of education from the Latin educere, which means to bring out. So we're tapping into this soul force that is within us, and then we're using that soul force to identify and to activate that same soul force in every learner that we come in contact with, in every teacher that's going to work with every learner. So it's a soul-to-soul communication that transcends all the trivial things that have been created in order to divide us. So this is a form of communication, a form of consciousness that has always been our saving grace. When we go back to our default position, which is our African humanity, and tap into that, bathe ourselves in that, wrap ourselves in the love of our ancestors, then every ancestor along our ancestral line has access to us. And when we choose to be a willing vessel through which these ancestors will live, speak, breathe, and do their best work, then we will see the best of us come forward. This is the essence of who we are and who we have always been. Nobody on this planet has been able to accomplish the things that African people have accomplished, beginning in the Nile Valley, continuing with our migration from the Nile to the Niger, developing great kingdoms and great libraries, and then us being taken out of that environment and then used to build the Western world. The Western world would not exist. North America, South America, the islands in the Caribbean, Europe as a international power would not exist were it not for the use of African power. Everyone prospers from us except us. So now it's time for us to realize who we are and be responsible for educating ourselves so that we can be the instruments of our own creation, as opposed to following someone else's perception of what reality is. That's what time it is. And everything that has been transpiring over the past, let's say 20 years, has been leading us in that direction. So now is not the time to be fearful. Now is not the time to be tired. Now is the time to understand very clearly our place in the world and our capacity as James Small likes to say, our capacity as spiritual beings having a human experience to manifest the power that is within the spirit and the soul force that we carry, and embrace that power. Fully accept who we are and use that power to transform the world again. This is our story. This is what we've done longer and better than any other people on the planet. And it's time for us to wake up, tap into that power, and teach our young folk who they are so that they can be a part of this continuum.
Thank you so much, Tony, for that. So again, your chapter is chapter 3 in the book, and it's titled The Cultural Imperative Initiative. The Cultural Imperative Initiative. And so this is going off topic, and Janice is probably going to kill me, like, Dr. V, you said you was going to stay on topic. But I think it's an important question, because I feel like the purpose of Planet Venus, the purpose of ABEN, and I think that Nana Joyce King stated it perfectly. She described Debra Watkins as a rhizome, and the work that's being done through ABEN as a network of scholars. And so for me, Tony, just being in academia for over 20 years and now choosing to step out of it, but be also, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, watching people like you, Dr. Naeem Akbar, Dr. Wade Nobles, and even, Wade Nobles' wife, watching Atlantis, watching Debra Watkins. I think that sometimes our priorities become skewed, and we're beginning to lose this cultural knowledge in order to be successful in a larger economy. almost like a survival ship, right?
Mhm.
But we're losing some of this knowledge. Some of those names you've been dropping, many of our younger scholars, they certainly don't know. They
Mhm.
don't know that well, 20 years ago, I was sitting at the foot of, of Chris Wesling, right? Or I was in that room, and you told me, I think maybe 10, 15 years ago to go check out Patricia Newton,
Mm.
right? So I'm choosing during this time of crises, and I know that you and others may say we've been in a state of crises for at least 400 years where you've been, Venus. But for my generation, this is the crisis to come back to that mind work, that psychic work, so to speak. But how do you think Black scholars can retain some of this historical knowledge and also recover these cultural memories? Like, what is the role of the Black scholar, the Black researcher, the Black, practitioner?
Mhm. Well, I think it's critical for us to understand that nothing that comes stays and nothing that goes is lost. Life is cyclical. It doesn't just follow a straight or horizontal path or a straight ascent. Things flow in cycles. And we see that with the daily cycle, the sun rising and setting. We see that with the 29-day cycle of the moon. We see that with the 360-day cycle of the earth and its revolution around the sun. So the universe in which we live um, exists within multiple dimensions of cycles. History follows certain cycles. So the key role of a historian is to document the cycles of the past and to go back as far as you can with this documentation so that you can understand very clearly where you are, how you got where you are, the events that led to what's happening right now, so that with conscious intent on your part as a thinking thinking person, as a Homo sapiens sapien, person with the capacity for thought and the ability to know that you know, then to apply that capacity to understand how you got where you are, the events that determine where you are right now, and then make a conscious decision to craft a path where you want to go. You map out that plan, a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, a lifetime, 2 lifetimes, 10 lifetimes. And when you think and function on that level, then you'll find that you will have the vision and the capacity to fulfill your vision. See, one of the things that this society would never teach you, and when I speak of this society, I mean from a social standpoint, from an educational standpoint, and from a religious standpoint, you're never going to be taught who you are as a person. We have the capacity for unlimited thought. Whatever we think, we have the capacity to bring into manifestation. So whoever controls your thinking determines what you manifest. So if our thinking has been controlled conservatively over the past 500 years here in this country, then it means that our capacity for greatness will never be achieved as long as we follow the path established for us by the people who enslaved us and are responsible for educating us. We have to have the courage to step back from this posture and begin to become aware of greater forces that exist beyond the limitation of the forces of our oppressors. So it takes a certain degree of courage. It takes a willingness to step outside of the box, right? To operate outside of the box. And once you choose to operate outside of the box, you'll come to realize that there is no box, that there are no limitations, that we have the capacity and the right to do the things that will enhance not only the quality of our individual lives, but our collective lives. And what we do will impact the lives of everyone who comes from us. So that's a hell of a obligation. It's a hell of a responsibility. And when people are socialized to understand that everything you think creates ripples in time for all time, then you control your thoughts, you modulate your speech, you modulate your behavior, and you transform every aspect of your being. And as a transformed being moving into spaces, you then will transform the consciousness of other beings in the spaces that you step into. See, that's the power. That's how this thing works. And so when you do that and see it in action, you realize that's what I'm living for, right? And along that same line, it is the responsibility of our oppressors to do everything within their power to diminish our capacity to utilize that power. So these are two opposing forces, just like night and day are two opposing forces. But once you understand how these two opposing forces work, then you can figure out a path to neutralize the opposition and achieve those things that you desire. Right? That's the bigger picture. That's the end goal. And my sister, we are moving towards that time right now. I've lived long enough. I just turned 73 last week. So I've lived long enough to see patterns in my lifetime. And I've studied history long enough to see patterns 100 lifetimes, 1,000 lifetimes before mine. So I can synthesize all of this knowledge and get a clearer picture of where I am right now, the circumstances that shaped this conversation that's happening right now. This conversation didn't happen in the vacuum. I did certain things, you did certain things, other people did certain things to ensure that this conversation took place right now, all right, when it's supposed to take place. And specific things are going to come from this conversations that will create ripples in time in the future and influence the minds of sisters and brothers 100 years from now, 500 years from now. That's the scope of what we're talking about. And when you're thinking and functioning on that level, there's no obstacle that can prevent you from achieving your goals.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that wisdom. I appreciate it. I can't pay you for that right now, but no, just,
well,
I owe you.
It's a debt that will be paid in the future lifetime, believe me.
I owe you. Yeah, well, hopefully I can get on one of those Egypt trips. That's what we hoping. I need to get to those Egypt trips. Well, okay, so that concludes our interview today, our session today, discussing a soul-centered approach to educating teachers, a Black education network. And I personally want to thank you for honoring the emotional, mental, cultural labor of Debra Watkins, Miss Debra Watkins, some of us call her Mama, Debra, for her work with the ABEN and connecting all of us, right, across geographical spaces, physical spaces, intellectual spaces. And so we just want to do good by her collective work in this book. So gratitude. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And let me just add one addendum. A soul-centered approach to teaching. Everybody is a teacher. Everybody is a teacher. Parents, aunts, uncles, everybody in the household, everybody in the neighborhood is a teacher. And when we accept the responsibility of helping to favorably shape the minds of young people and old people, we will see a profound shift in our thinking and our behavior, which this shift will benefit our people, African people specifically, for lifetimes to come. And that's what this work is all about.
Thank you for stating that. So it was back in 2019, maybe 2019-ish. And Tony, I was thinking about leaving academia after achieving the status of full professor. And I was speaking to my 82-year-old friend, 82, a sharecropper's education, probably left in middle school, left school in middle school to take care of her family and move up north, right? And she told me when I was having this conversation with her, she said, Venus, child, you're going to teach anywhere. And I remember thinking, oh, and that's when I made the decision. She said, Venus, you're going to teach anywhere. But somehow I was tied to that identity, that institutional identity. But I think, yes, that's what we somehow need to tell our people. We've always been teachers, and we're always teaching in some type of capacity. So thank you. I definitely honor your work, and I appreciate your flexibility. I know that you have a very heavy schedule. You keep moving. That's why you stay so young. You and Atlanta stay so young. Y'all need to one day come back and teach us y'all diet. That's what I want to know. Like, what are y'all eating? Because clearly we're not all eating the same foods.
Well, a diet is a Japanese word that means way of life. So it's not just what you eat. It's monitoring everything that comes into your body, what you listen to, what you see, what you think. All of these things affect you on a cellular level. And when you understand that, then you can live the life that you were born to live. And that's what it's all
Yes,
about.
yes.
And the world is your classroom, my sister. The world is our classroom, right? So don't allow anybody to restrict your capacity for greatness to a physical space, right? We're
Yeah.
out in the ethers and we're transforming minds and saving lives every single second. So I
Mm.
appreciate you for your dedication and the work that you're doing. And you have a bright future ahead of you, for
Well,
sure.
thank you. Gratitude. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, Janice.